So, hello Liberty lovers, welcome to the Grey Sheep's page, your dose of unconventional politics. Today my guest is the Ontario Director for the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, an advocacy group wanting lower taxes, less waste, and accountable government. Candice Malcolm, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
First, tell us about yourself. Have you ever walked down the road to serfdom? If so, what brought you on the road to freedom? If not, what did bring you on the road to freedom since it's not a very frequented road?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I grew up in Vancouver, so I think out there there's kind of a different attitude towards politics. I grew up being fairly apathetic towards, especially federal politics and government. While I was in university, I just opened my mind to different worldviews, different readings. I kind of started out a little bit more on the left side, and then I think through university, just basically reading a lot of different works, everyone from John Locke to Adam Smith, and then it was sort of more contemporary writers that got me interested in libertarian ideas, particularly Robert Nozick, who's a moral philosopher. He wrote the book Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and he talked about an entitlement theory, which is basically just that what you create, you own, and you have the right to that. And the government doesn't really have the right to come in and tax it. And it was basically a moral argument talking about how taxes are not moral if you're creating what you're making. That was a convincing argument to me. And then I think I went on and read more Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek, Mises, and all the other people that sort of got me on board in a libertarian worldview. And I did an internship at the Fraser Institute and learned a lot more about free markets and economics. And I think, from there I was pretty much dedicated to being a free market or libertarian advocate.
You said that before college you weren't interested in politics. How was politics in your family?
Well, I think that, we talked about it a little bit. My father's sort of interested in ideas, but not interested in politics. So we were never very partisan. And certainly we would have political debates around the dinner table, mostly about U.S. politics. My stepmother's American and she's a Democrat. And then my father's probably more on the right side of the spectrum. So, we had sort of debates there. I think I was just more apathetic towards the federal government. I didn't really understand why, people wanted decisions to be made in Ottawa when they should be made a lot closer to home. So, I was kind of turned off by politics. I was never really into party politics or really very partisan things. And I think that it was more the ideas that got me interested and engaged. And as I became more and more interested, I was a little bit involved in party politics. I did some volunteering, but it was definitely more the ideas side of it that drew me in.
Okay, well, speaking of ideas, can you tell me a little about the Canadian Taxpayer Federation and has some of its advocacy been successful through the years?
Yeah, sure. So the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, or we call it the CTF, was started in the 90s, and it was sort of a reactionary protest movement against the GST at the time. And then I think that the leaders of the organization back then decided to come together and create a national organization to proactively fight against tax hikes. So, looking down the road, what are politicians potentially looking to implement down the road and getting ahead of it, getting citizens involved. So we're a citizen-led advocacy group. We fight for lower taxes. We also expose waste in government. So we're trying to minimize waste in government and really make politicians accountable. So, we're on the ground. We're engaging with both politicians and local activists and doing advocacy through online petitions, through writing in newspapers and doing media appearances. We all travel around our province and our regions to sort of promote this message. And I think we have had a lot of successes over the years. Just recently, through our advocacy efforts with pensions, MPs in Ottawa, federal politicians, used to contribute only $1 for every $24 taxpayers contributed into their pension fund. We thought this was outrageous, so we launched a national campaign with billboards, started writing letters, and within a few months, Stephen Harper and his administration changed the formula completely and got it a lot closer to the $1 to $1 that we were advocating for. So that's just one example of many that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation identifies a policy in government that just isn't quite fair to taxpayers. It doesn't really make sense. And through our efforts and through pressure on politicians through the media, we enact change that way. So it's a great organization. It's a lot of fun to work for. Because it's very free market, we get to choose which issues we pursue, and I think we're probably one of the most libertarian organizations in the country.
I think you're also responsible for creating the debt clock and traveling around the country. How has this campaign been?
Yeah, that's another one that we're sort of known for. When it comes to debt, the numbers that we're talking about are so massive. It's really difficult to comprehend. Here in Ontario, the debt is pushing $300 billion. I have no idea what $300 billion looks like. I think most people have a really hard time wrapping their head around $1 million, let alone billion, let alone hundreds of billions. So the CTF created a debt clock. It's exactly what it sounds. It's a 12-foot long scoreboard that shows the debt, and we can calibrate it to any jurisdiction. So I had it in Ontario last summer. We calibrated to the Ontario debt, which at the time was about $263 billion, and it's going up in real time. So Ontario's debt was increasing at $373 every second. So that's how fast the clock was going up, and we drove it all across Ontario just to show people, this is what the provincial government is doing. This is what happens when a government spends more than it brings in, when it lives beyond its means, and this debt is real. It's something that taxpayers owe, that we pay interest on every year. Here in Ontario, interest on the debt is the third largest payment in all of government. So $11 billion a year basically gets paid. Yeah, just flushed down the toilet, basically, just going towards banks and bondholders. It's a way. It's when we're talking about waste in government, that's one of the largest ways. Let alone the fact that eventually we're going to have to pay back this debt. Eventually, our tax dollars, instead of going towards services, our taxes are going to go to pay for old government programs that were used by past generations and past Canadians. So it's not really fair to young Canadians, to future generations, especially the fact that everyone in this province is on the hook for $20,000 in just provincial debt, and then of course there's federal debt on top of that. So I think using the debt clock, it's a tool that we have to kind of engage regular people and discuss the issue of debt, because it's not something that you hear about very often. It's not something you learn about in school, particularly in high school. So I think that's been one of the more successful ways that we have in just engaging regular people to talk about some of the issues about government policy.
There's going to be a federal election in about a year from now. What is your assessment of the Harper government's first majority, and what do you think about his main opponents?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think when Stephen Harper finally got his majority, a lot of people had high expectations because of his background. I mean, he was a free market leader. He sort of came to his ideas through economics, and sort of had a libertarian leaning to him as well. But I think given the realities of the situation in Ottawa, some of the things he's done have been very good. Some of them not so good. Look at the fact that this government brought in a $50 billion deficit for a stimulus package. That he ran deficits for most of the time during the majority. The government's finally balancing the budget this year. But I think that there has been some disappointments. But at the same time, they have made some good strides in other directions. So, we basically got a balanced budget this year. We're anticipating tax cuts, well-deserved tax cuts. I think Canadians, we contribute a lot to the government, and we've seen the government spending contracted over the last few years. And I think it's time that Canadians got some of their money back through tax cuts. I like to see that. And I think as far as the election, if the campaign is fought over things like a free trade agreement with the European Union, tax cuts for Canadians, and balancing the budget, those are exactly the kind of issues that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation thinks should be at the forefront of politics, talking about economic matters and being fiscally responsible. Hopefully that those are going to be the things that people talk about during the election, and the three parties can duke it out over who's gonna promise the best economic government for Canadians.
Moving to Ontario now, I heard that one of the budgets of the previous Liberal government passed only because they had to concede tax increase for the NDP. What are the perspectives of Wine's government now that it's a majority with respect to taxes and spending?
Yeah, I think it's pretty worrisome here in Ontario. Before the recent election, with minority Liberal government, they had to get the approval of one of the opposition parties, either the NDP or the PC. So there was a lot more reconciliation and a lot more discussion between the parties. But of course, now that they have a majority government, the Kathleen Wynne government can just sort of go ahead with what her is on her agenda, which is a host of tax increases, new entitlement programs, and really no regard for fiscal responsibility or balancing the budget. We've had 8 consecutive deficits here in Ontario. Provincial debt has doubled over the past decade. So, I think a lot of us are concerned about the ticking time bomb in Ontario. Just the fact that our debt to GDP ratio is soaring, the interest payments are getting higher and higher, and unlike in Quebec, this government has showed absolutely no interest in getting the books back in order, in explaining how they're going to balance the budget. Moody's downgraded our credit outlook from stable down to negative. We had a credit downgrade 2 years ago after the budget. There's a lot of concern with the pocketbook balanced budget issues here in Ontario, and again, the government has declared itself to be a social justice activist government, and their focus is on building a new Canadian pension plan in Ontario, so that Ontario taxpayers are going to have to pay both the CPP plus the new Ontario registered pension plan. They've increased taxes on flying, income taxes on higher income earners. They brought in a new tobacco tax. They've brought in a bunch of new taxes, and yet they're still running deficits. So I'm not very optimistic about this government, but sooner or later they're going to have to wake up to the facts that you can't just keep running $12 billion deficits every year.
You talked about the possible or new Ontario pension plan. Would it be like Saskatchewan in the way that it's voluntary, or would it be like Quebec and it's compulsory and taken out of the paycheck?
It would be like Quebec, compulsory, except for Quebec. From my understanding, Quebec's opted out of the CPP, so Quebec workers only pay for their Quebec pension, whereas in Ontario, the idea is actually to build this new ORPP, Ontario Registered Pension Plan, to build it on top of CPP. So Ontario workers would still be forced to contribute to the CPP, but then we'd also be forced to contribute another 4% to this ORPP. So this seems like a half-baked scheme that came out during the last budget, and then they won the election with this as a key plank of the platform. So we're expecting it to be introduced over the next few years. More details hopefully to come, but no, there's no choice whatsoever. The government is really taking away the choice as to how you can save for your own retirement, and saying, we don't trust average workers in Ontario to save for themselves, so we're going to force contribute and save for them.
No, it's the same thing in Quebec. One of the suggestions from a parliamentary commission about retirement was to have I can't remember the exact translation in English, but starting at age 75, you would receive annuities just because the actual pension plan is not enough.
I mean, the thing is, these pension plans, they were never built to be your entire retirement fund. They're supposed to supplement, supposed to be somewhere between 20 and 25% of your pre-retirement income, just to help individuals save. But I think the concept now is that people aren't saving on their own, and the government wants to build a bigger and bigger retirement fund for everybody. But the reality is that it takes so much from workers. It's just no longer a good deal at all, especially for young workers. The CPP has been increased, contributions have been increased by over 200% over the last 2 decades, but benefits haven't gone up. So, younger worker, people our age, we're contributing way more than any previous generation ever did into these funds, and we're not getting anything else out. It's a terrible deal, and yet these politicians are convinced that they need to take more and more and save a bigger pot for us. It's not a good policy, and it's just not fair for young workers.
It's not, but unfortunately, the votes are usually with the baby boomers or the older generation, so I guess it's a matter of incentives.
Well, exactly. It's pandering. Politicians know that seniors vote, and so that they're never going to introduce a policy that might be bad for seniors or for older voters. People our age and younger typically don't vote, so that's why we're in a situation where a lot of the government programs go towards helping older folks that are wealthier. Seniors are wealthier now than they've ever been. Young people are less well off than they have been in the past, and yet we're still seeing more and more programs to supplement the lifestyle of elderly Canadians and at the expense of people in their 20s and 30s.
Quebec is usually seen as the worst student in the class with respect to almost any metrics. You've been talking a little about Ontario debt and deficits. How is Ontario faring considering that it's receiving equalization and has a very sizable debt now?
Yeah, I mean, the tables have really turned. Ontario was once the economic engine of the country, and now it's just like some of the other provinces. Goes cap in hand to the federal government and expects equalization transfers to help pay its bills. It's kind of a sad turn of events in Ontario because of policies of Dalton McGuinty and now Kathleen Wynne over the last decade. Our debt. Our total debt is more than Quebec. Per capita debt is around the same. Interest payments on the debt are around the same as Quebec. But Quebec is sort of turning around. It looks like they, with the new Liberal government, are talking about implementing at least some things to get back to a balanced budget, and they're expected to balance their budget before Ontario does. I think that Ontario could actually follow Quebec's lead right now. They have to do something because the economy is just not picking up as it used to. We're losing a lot of the manufacturing base is leaving the province with energy rates and prices soaring. It's another cause for companies to want to leave. Plus now there's these new payroll taxes that are being introduced, the pension that I was just talking about. It's making Ontario less and less desirable. And the provincial government is starting to blame the federal government and saying it's their fault that Ontario is in this situation because they should receive a bigger piece of the equalization pie. But that's a completely wrong attitude. Ontario only has itself to blame for the situation it's in. It shouldn't go cap in hand to the feds and demand more equalization. The formula was designed so that Ontario would always be a have province, and it should continue to be, just given its population and history and location, geographical location. We have all the tools to have a strong economy. We just don't have the leadership. So the idea that somehow equalization can help fix Ontario's problems is completely wrong. The problems are deeper and the cause of bad management at the provincial level.
You mentioned energy prices. Back in college, I had a class where I saw that the energy privatization in Ontario was a fiasco. What went wrong and what could have been done better?
Well, it was barely a privatization. They had one mega hydro producer, and they split it up into 5 or 6 different components. But they're all still state run. They're all still government owned. They're not, it's barely privatization. It's just sort of broken up. And there's a lot of problems inherently. There was just an Auditor General report that looked at the Ontario Power Generation and Hydro One, which are 2 of those breakoffs. And just the management itself, the number of workers who earn over $100,000 or over $200,000 a year has gone up significantly.
Engineers or higher up people?
Middle managers, yeah, engineers. Ontario discloses all workers in the province that work for the government who earn over $100,000. We have a sunshine list, and the number of people on the sunshine list is just steadily gone up in those government-owned crown corporations. So there was a lot of problems that the Auditor General had about the way that those programs were run, and the government is now reviewing them and trying to figure out, how should we sell these off? Should we sell some of the assets, or should we continue to run it through the government? The reason for the energy increases are a lot to do with the Ontario's Green Energy Act. It came in under Dalton McGuinty in the late 2000s. Ontario phased out the production of coal and replaced it with a number of different sort of greener energy production, such as windmills, wind farms, gas plants, and solar farms. Now these haven't really panned out the way that they were supposed to. There's a lot of waste and energy in that regard, and the cost of green energy is going through the roof. So I would focus more on the Green Energy Act as to the reason why energy prices are going up so much. There have been other problems. The gas plant scandal was a big deal in 2011. The Liberal government under Dalton McGuinty canceled the creation of two gas plants after they'd already spent $1 billion building them, and decided to move them elsewhere because of sort of local complaints and local NIMBY, not in my backyard activists saying, no, we don't want these gas plants in suburban Toronto. So the government decided to cancel the building of these gas plants during the provincial election in 2011. So that was a very big scandal here in Ontario. And of course, that's also part of the cause for concern with energy production in this province.
Well, since you mentioned green energy, is the green momentum still strong in Ontario, and is it helping at all? One further question, is there anything done about nuclear plants, because I think they're due for their maintenance?
Yeah, so I think that people still like the idea of green energy. I mean, it's sort of a romantic idea. Let's phase out some of the fossil fuels or some of the greenhouse gas emissions and create a green economy. It sounds good in practice, and in theory, I mean, but in practice, it hasn't worked at all. And I think a lot of people have sort of come to recognize that a lot of the big promises made by the McGuinty administration about creating green jobs really haven't panned out. They were supposed to create thousands of green jobs. The Auditor General found that most of the jobs that were created were just temporary construction jobs and actually not real long-term jobs in the economy. And I think there's a lot of cynicism now about the wind turbine programs. There have been a lot of companies that ended up having to leave the province. So I don't think that the moment, well, just because of some of the contracts with McGuinty government just haven't panned out as they were supposed to. And I think especially the solar farms haven't been able to produce as much energy as they were supposed to. So that's part of the reason why they ended up having to build more gas plants, was just because these wind turbines and solar farms weren't producing as much energy as they had hoped, and they weren't able to store as much energy. So there's still a lot of kinks. The technology is not, it's new. Part of the problem with being one of the first jurisdictions to try these new technologies is that you're kind of the guinea pig, and they're learning through trial and error that they're not really producing what they had hoped. So I think that there's a lot more cynicism now surrounding the entire Green Energy Act. A lot of sort of negative things written about it in newspapers across the spectrum. So I think moving forward, it might be sort of time to phase some of these new projects out. And we're yet to see what the next energy phase is going to be. We're expecting to hear from the Ministry of Energy about that in this term or early 2015, and then we'll learn more about the mix between gas plants, nuclear, and these wind and solar farms.
When I look at Canadian politics, and influential female like Pauline Marois, Kathleen Wynne, and Alison Redford, they all seem to want bigger government. Why is that females seem at least seem to want bigger government, and why aren't there more people like Danielle Smith?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't, I can't speak for all women. I don't really know why some of these women on the left have risen more to prominence. But here in Ontario, the leader of the NDP party, Andrea Horwath, is a woman. The leader of the Liberal Party, Kathleen Wynne, is a woman, obviously. And now there's a provincial leadership race for the Progressive Conservatives, and there's already 2 women running for that position. So, I think that there are more and more women getting involved in politics across the board. Danielle Smith is a great example of a very powerful, very, driven and successful female politician that's more on the free market side and libertarian leaning politician. So, I think having role models like that might inspire more women to get involved. I also think that women typically don't have the same interest in running for office and being a politician as men do. So, there's more women doing other roles in society, taking on different kinds of leadership positions, whether it be through charities and nonprofits or community organizations or entrepreneurs or being at home with the family. I think there's other positions that women in general might prefer as opposed to politics. And I think there's more and more women involved in free market and libertarian movement. Year after year, when I first started being involved in doing libertarian seminars, there was barely any women at all. Now when I go to different kinds of libertarian events, it seems like there's more women every every year. So, I think that there, like you said, that there's needs to be more leaders, people like Danielle Smith, and I think that might encourage others to get involved. No, I wanted to take a second to plug my new book. I've written a book. I've got it right here. It's called Generation Screwed. Yeah, so that book is coming out soon. It's going to be available on Amazon to order, on Kindle to download, starting on November 1st. And I'm going to be traveling around the country doing a book tour, speaking about the book. So the book, some of the things I was talking about earlier about how government structures and taxes and programs aren't very fair to young people. That's the focus of the book, is talking about some of the problems with government debt, some of the changing themes with demographics and more people retiring and utilizing the expensive government debt, demographics, and dependency. So, problem with government overspending and going further and further into debt. Some of the demographic changes that are happening when people are retiring and relying more and more on very expensive government programs like healthcare and pensions, and the problems with being too dependent on the government and relying on the government to do a lot of things for you. So that's what the book is about, and people can buy it either through my website, CandiceMalcolm.com, or on Amazon.
Well, Candice Malcolm, thanks for being with us. For those who still haven't joined Liberty.me yet, you can do it and save $5 a month on your subscription by entering the code BASTIAT-SAY. I hope to see you all there eventually, and may liberty be with you.
Great, thank you.
Malcolm,